Welcome to the Wednesday, March 20th, 2024 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held electronically, but we intend to conduct it similarly to an in-person meeting. Public comment will be via telephone or Zoom only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 934-6385-2907 or join via the Zoom link. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16. Raymond, if you could call roll, please.
Sure thing. And as a reminder, please say here and from where it is you are calling in from when I say your name. Commissioner Boland.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Briggs. Commissioner Brogan.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hadamaki.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hauk.
Here from Ann Arbor.
And I'm going to give him just a moment. Commissioner Keeler.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Larry.
Okay, I didn't know if you called me yet or not, but I am here from Ann Arbor. Commissioner Keeler.
Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Carpenter.
Here from Superior Township.
Commissioner Ramaswamy. All right, Commissioner Hess here from Ann Arbor. Commissioner Hutchinson.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Margolis, absent. Lieutenant Mike Sherba.
Here from Tyrone Township.
Commissioner Stupka, absent. All right, we do have quorum.
All right, there are two items on the consent agenda, approval of the agenda and approval of the minutes. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Peter.
I just wanted to interrupt and say, is Won Woo trying to join? Oh no, I guess he's not. Sorry.
Yeah, it looks like he is on now. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark him as an attendance. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Briggs is joining as well.
Very good, thank you.
All right, is there a motion to approve consent agenda as presented? Moved by
I'll move to approve.
Seconded by Larry. All those in favor of the motion, please say yes or raise your hand.
Yes.
Those opposed to the motion, please say no or raise your hand. The consent agenda is approved. All right, public comment. Public commentary. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 934-6385-2907 or connect via Zoom as described on the agenda. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number or the person's Zoom ID. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone or select the raise hand button in Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we may hear you clearly. Raymond, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment. Give it just a moment, see if anybody would like to do so. All right, I think we can move on.
All right, thank you. Of course, as always, please note that there are 5 emails that were sent to the commission. So take a look at those. They're including attachments are part of the packet you have received. All right, first item of business. Page Avenue parking removal. Page Avenue is getting new sidewalks and will be resurfaced. Part of this proposal includes removal of parking on one side of Page between Esch and Harpst, which would require council action. So Jane Allen will walk us through the proposal and then seek our recommendation.
Good evening, everyone. Would you like me to share my screen of the project area?
It seems like that would probably be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. I hope everyone can see this. North is to your right. So this is Page Avenue. This is Etch right here. So we decided based on the existing utilities, we had to decide first of all which side of the road we wanted to place the sidewalk. And for a lot of conflicts to be avoided, we ended up putting it on the east side. We had 2 tours with residents to walk the area. We brought out our tape measures and talked about any impacts to their driveway or landscaping or fences. And after those 2 meetings and emails with feedback, we decided to relocate the curb to let people to like maintain some of the trees and landscaping that was there, and also the right of way Page is only 40 feet, and currently the road was 23 feet wide from gutter pan to gutter pan, and now it's going to be 20 feet wide from face of curb to face of curb, so 2 vehicles can pass. And we will then have to get rid of the parking on the east side of the street. We did consult with the fire marshal and Raymond Hess, and realized that if someone is parked on one side, there might only be 13 feet available, so it will be a yield condition at that time. So it goes here. We're going to put it on both sides of the street because they had existing sidewalk up to Ash. So that just made sense to finish that block that way with the sidewalk on both sides. And then we have all the sidewalk and 3 feet of lawn extension for signs and a few street trees. We'll negotiate with each resident. So it goes up to Harps, and then Harps and Etch both have sidewalks. So the sidewalk system continues, we want to try to get all the sidewalks connected to each other eventually. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. If I could just add one other note, one of the reasons we're bringing this to the Transportation Commission is that there is still a rule in the books that removal of parking for more than 1 block requires council approval. So you can see, since we're removing parking on one side of the street for, roughly 3 blocks or so, this would have to go to city council for ultimate approval. And so because, we like to bring these matters before the Transportation Commission to get a recommendation from you all before taking that to council. That's why it's before you today. And then just one other thing to note is, this street is very narrow. And we looked very closely at, the parking condition, sidewalk condition, all of that. And we feel that, the proposal in front of you really is kind of a compromise to still allow parking on one side and still have a sort of fairly calmed street because of how narrow it is, but then also incorporate that sidewalk, which is lacking pretty much through this entire length of the project. So.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Question for staff. Are staff recommending this approach? And I think you just said you did speak with, did some public engagement along the corridor?
Mm-hmm. Well, after the 2022 election, now City of Ann Arbor is going to be trying to fill the sidewalk gaps to the system using the new sidewalk millage. So eventually we want to try to get sidewalks everywhere that there aren't. This came up this year because we're going to be resurfacing in this area. And so we wanted to get the sidewalk in that was already in the CIP at that point. And also we had a petition from residents in the area that gave it extra points on the priority list. And then in walking and talking with all the residents and their concerns and then following up with individuals, this is the engineer's recommendation to narrow the vehicular lanes to 10 feet each and put in a sidewalk. So, and then a sidewalk that's not right at the back of right of way, so we can maintain some of the driveway length and landscaping and trees on the east side of the road.
Thank you. I'm generally supportive.
Thank you.
Erica?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just makes sense. The parking removal makes a lot. Definitely supportive of that. I'm just curious about the decision not to continue the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. Is there just not the width for making that happen, or is that a decision to is the compromise to maintain the parking on that side of the road?
No, I think it's because of the funding that we set aside for it. When we got the petition, they didn't specify which side of the road they wanted it on, but the money we programmed in the CIP for it would only cover one side. So in the future, the priority level of the west side of the road may come up again, in the future.
I'll add to that, if you don't mind. The funding was definitely part of it. We had enough money set aside to build sidewalk on one side, and to try to avoid a lot of those natural features. Moving the curb added a good amount of cost to this as well. It's a very narrow road. There's not a lot of space out there, and our design. Basically, we settled on, let's at least get a sidewalk on one side so that we, pedestrians along this stretch can be able to walk up and down the corridor. It's not to preclude that in the future, a sidewalk couldn't be built on the other side, but it's tight in there. And this was kind of the best we felt we could do for the time being.
So is it being funded by the CIP or from the sidewalk millage?
The sidewalk
millage. This is being funded from the sidewalk millage.
Peter?
Yeah, I guess I was also wondering about the decision to only do the sidewalk on one side. Like, realistically, when would we come back here and put that in?
It will likely be a long time before we come back to put in sidewalk on the other side, because we have many, many, many miles of sidewalk all throughout the city to do. I couldn't predict when we would be back here.
I guess my sense on this is that we have a standard, which is complete streets, that has sidewalk on both sides, and when we deviate from that standard, it becomes that much more difficult to enforce. In places where people don't want sidewalks, I imagine that this will be offered up as an example of a way to do a compromise, even though I don't think it's a good compromise. So that's my concern about about coming up with a solution that only has the sidewalk on one side. This also includes a lawn extension. That's three feet of width that could be used for for a sidewalk on both sides. Is there?
It's a policy of the city to put 3 feet of lawn extension there so it can have room for signs. So vehicles passing don't hit the signs if they're,
Okay.
if they're out. And also in the wintertime, residents use it for snow storage.
Okay, it's also our policy to have sidewalks on both sides. So it seems like something has to give. So, I guess I'm not sure what the right thing to give is.
Matt?
So a question back to staff. The engineers recommended this particular configuration with a sidewalk on one side of the street. I think you said because the road is unusually narrow. I may have misheard that, but please correct me if that's wrong. In terms of consistency with other things, if someone were to say, hey, do the same thing over here, I think we would point out that their street maybe is not as narrow. Is this just a question of shoehorning physical infrastructure in as it can be accommodated? And why didn't the engineer recommend sidewalks on both sides?
When the project came to me, it was already decided to put sidewalks on one side of the street, and it was our job to decide which side of the street that would be on. Possibly Nick could speak more to that, how it developed. But if you see closely at this 20-foot face-to-face driving lane, you can see the right-of-way here, the very dark line, that we were able to save some of their landscaping, because originally we were going to put the sidewalk right where that line is, and we had to take out a lot more.
Part of this comes down to, we have very limited funds through the sidewalk millage, and we can only do so much each year with the money that we have available. So, I mean, is it better to build sidewalk on both sides of this very small residential street, or is it better to build more sidewalks in more places? But funding is limited, so I mean that's part of it. The impacts on building the sidewalk are quite substantial. That's why we're moving the sidewalk on the east side, to try to create more space to build the sidewalk on the east side. And we would have to have, probably something similar done on the west side in order to build the sidewalk, which doesn't leave a whole lot of road left either. But there's going to be cases where we're going to be bringing sidewalk gap filling projects forward, where for the time being, we're only building sidewalk on one side of the street, because the cost of building on two sides is so great that, we have to kind of pick and choose to some degree. If we had unlimited funding, we'd be building it on both sides.
I hear you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject that I did want to confirm that this right of way is narrower than most. It's 40 feet versus normally 66 feet. We did get a variance to put the sidewalk here, right against the back of curb, because the transportation team didn't believe that there was going to be a need for any signs in that location. If we were to do it on the west side in the future, we'd either have to do it the same way, which I believe there are going to be signs. So we'll have to get permanent easements from the residents. There is a block here that it goes from 40, then it jogs out. That's just one block that, comes like a half of one block and a half of the other. We do have an increase right away from the plat books, but and then we could shift the sidewalk within the right of way at that time, but we'd have to get some easements if we wanted to do it on the west side.
In the interests of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the possible, Mr. Chair, I would move to accept the recommendation as tabled.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right thing to do. I would second that. I would like to add, Raymond, that and I guess I'm sorry, I'd like to add, Nick, that if we are going to be faced with a situation where our sidewalk millage and the amount of funding that we have is going to mean that we need to make decisions about which side of the street to put sidewalks on in lots of places, then I would really like to see some effort put into decision-making guidelines in advance. I do not want to find ourselves in a situation where we go from project to project arguing about which side of the street the sidewalk should be on, and having to have a lot of a lot of discussion and controversy over it. We need to decide what our guidelines are in advance, and then be ready to apply them. And if there are places where they absolutely don't work, okay, then we can make exceptions in the rare cases. But please, let's have some guidelines for that if that's what we're going to do. Now, back to Matt Carpenter's motion, I would like to second it.
So, let me get back to the agenda here. What we're being asked to consider for the purposes of this business item is the removal of parking on one side. Let's see. Yeah, so this isn't really, I guess it's implying approval of the design as a whole, but what we're voting on as a commission tonight is about removing parking from one side of the street. So, is there any other discussion on the design or the motion to remove parking and send it to council? Megan.
I just wanted to make a quick comment that I live nearby and I'm excited. This is, yeah, like a thoroughfare. We use that term while we were discussing it. There's a lot of people walking up and down all the time. So, yeah, would love to see sidewalks on both sides eventually, but understood the limitations. And I think this is going to be a good addition to the neighborhood. So thanks, staff. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. All right, so is there a motion to recommend approval of the removal of parking on one side of the street on page between Esch and Harpst? Megan, moved by Megan, seconded by Wan Wu. All those in favor of the motion, please say yes or raise your hand. All those opposed to the motion, please say no or raise your hand. The motion passes. All right, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I was typing, so I thought there was already the motion from Matt, seconded by Pete, but then there was the. I guess
my impression is that was just kind of an informal. Matt is a.
Okay, I just want to make sure you all are happy with the minutes when it shows who made the motion and the second. I just want to make sure that I'm not capturing it properly. So I'll list Brovin and Lee then as the first and second then. Okay.
All right, moving on to information and discussion. First up is the 2024 street resurfacing and related projects topic. Every year we get an update from the engineering department on the project's plan for 2024 and which areas are scheduled to be resurfaced. So Nick Hutchinson will be giving us that presentation this evening and answering any questions. Nick.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here and hopefully that works properly. 1 second here while I get that sorted. Okay, hopefully you see my presentation screen. Thumbs up on that. Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, excellent. So this is our annual presentation of the road improvements for each year, and I'll acknowledge up front that it is not February 21st, 2024, but after this got bumped from last agenda, I never changed the date, so ignore that. Let's see here. How do I move this forward? Okay, that'll do it, I think. I'm assuming you can see the second slide now, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this presentation is going to be kind of skew towards more of a general overview of our construction projects for this year. We will get into some of the specifics, but I want to start by covering some of the background and overview about about pavement improvement projects in general. Starting with the different types of resurfacing type treatments that we're talking about. They fall into three general categories. The first one is preservation, and those are like capital preventative maintenance type projects. Those are projects that are like cape seals, surface treatments. They're basically improvements that are done on roads that aren't in too bad a condition to maintain them in that good condition. And it generally is something that's added onto the existing surface without really tearing up the existing surface. We're going to focus tonight a little bit more on the second two. The next level up from that is what we call a restoration. That's where we remove part of the asphalt pavement, maybe only mill down a portion of it, and then repave a new surface on top of that. So that's usually just dealing with the pavement and not a lot of the other ancillary things, although we will do things like ADA ramps and stuff like that. The third one up is what we would call a rehabilitation. And that's where the pavement has degraded to such a point where you really can't do anything else with it other than completely removing that asphalt and repaving the whole, the whole asphalt pavement. There is a fourth here, which what we would call a reconstruction. We don't use those very much because they are very costly. And in a reconstruction, you're really tearing up everything. You're going down into the base. You're tearing out usually all the curb and gutter. And those are much more major projects and also quite costly. So why do we use all these different treatments? It really comes down to pavement asset management. And there's a link here in the presentation that will bring you to one of our web pages that talks about that in a lot more detail, which I'm not going to go into that much detail here tonight. But what it really comes down to is using the right fix for the right street at the right time. And that's how we really, that philosophy is really how we move that, the overall condition of our system forward. Okay, next, I wanted to look at some of what the core elements of these type of treatments are. The key thing obviously is to repair that existing pavement surface, either repair or replace that surface so that we get a nice, flat, smooth new road. We do include some curb replacement as needed. That's mostly in those rehabilitations where we're taking off all the asphalt, either to repair some curb that's in really poor condition or has been shifted out of place to maintain proper drainage. So this type of work is generally contained within the existing road footprint. So while we might be doing a patch of curb here, a patch of curb there, we're not tearing out the curb, we're not moving curb lines, we're not widening, narrowing roads, things like that. And for these types of projects, data collection and detailed design are pretty minimal, and that helps, keep the cost of these type of treatments down relatively low and allows us to do more of them. Okay. So looking at some of the other opportunities that we have to go along with these projects, one of them is we do a little bit of work on drainage and stormwater. As I mentioned, we may be replacing some curb just to help stormwater flow a little bit better, but we also replace some of the catch basins, the storm catch basins, either to repair them or modernize them. We also look at replacing any sidewalk ramps that are not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's standard practice for any of these resurfacing projects. And then, looking at opportunities to get us in alignment with our Vision Zero plan. And then traffic calming and speed management, which many of you will recall back in September of last year, there was a resolution passed by City Council for us to be looking at opportunities with all of our resurfacing projects for introducing traffic calming or speed management elements. Now, we're still working on developing exactly what those criteria are for when we do that and what types of treatments we would put in. So this is a little bit of a transition year, but I'll talk a little bit more on some future slides about some of the things that we are doing with some of our projects this year. So work gets accomplished through various means, and a lot of these are through various different types of projects. The first one, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is our annual preventative maintenance program. That's its own project with its own project manager and its own contract, and that's for doing things like the crack sealing and the cape seals and stuff like that. And we treat that as a completely separate contract because it's a different type of contractor that does that kind of work, and so it just makes sense to have that separated out from the rest of the road work. The next thing is our annual street resurfacing program. This primarily focuses on our local neighborhood residential streets, although occasionally we'll throw in a major street in with that as well. And again, that is a separate program with its own project manager, its own contract, and everything. That program, the way we've been running it, tends to focus on go kind of neighborhood by neighborhood around the city. And the advantages to doing it that way are that, we can come in a neighborhood once, get a whole lot of the work done, not have to be in and out all the time, disturbing people. And we also get, bundling that together and keeping the contractor in one area helps, get us better costs as well. The next type of project is a standalone utility project. When you think utility project, you don't necessarily think roads, but very many of those are the type of projects where we'll come in, we'll do the utility work. More often than not, it's water main type work. And then once we get the water main in the ground, then we will resurface the road afterwards. And those are yet different types of contractors that tend to do those types of underground projects. Most of those are standalone utility projects as well. And so occasionally we bundle some of those together as well. And then there's other standalone projects. The picture on the screen here, Scioto Church, is a good example of that. Sometimes, especially on the major roads, projects are just big enough that it makes sense to do them as their own contracts. Okay, so now we'll look at some of the specifics here of what is going on in this year in 2024. And on the screen here, I have a couple of links that are very handy for you to know. The first one here is a link to our page, our webpage, with our currently happening road construction projects. So any place where we've got roads closed or detours posted, it's basically a list of, like, if you want to know what's closed right now, this is the place to go. Probably even more informative, though, is the second link, our dashboard, or multi-page dashboard for at a2gov.org/a2streets. And I presented on this last year, actually. This is a dashboard with several different pages on it. It covers our road condition ratings. It covers all of the road work on a map that we're going to be doing this year. And then there's also another page that looks out at planned projects for the coming years into the future as well. So I hype that up as much as I can. If you want to know what's going on and what will be going on in Ann Arbor, that's the place to go. So hang on to those links if you don't have them already handy. So now we'll look at some more specifics in here. One of the other pages on that dashboard that I just mentioned is a page related to our road bond funds. If you recall, a couple of years ago, City Council approved a road bond to accelerate some road work, and this map shows all of that road work. I know it's kind of small there, but those the ones that are kind of a reddish color there were things that were done in 2022. The blue ones are projects that were completed in 2023. And then the purple ones are what's left for us to do this year in 2024. And I list some of those over there on the side: Page, Yost, Northbrook, Norfolk, and Suffolk, and a couple more locations where we're going to be doing CPM type treatments as well. We've made great progress with spending those bond funds, and we expect to have them completely expended by the end of 2024. Next up here, we'll look at the annual street resurfacing program. Like I mentioned, we tend to go neighborhood by neighborhood on this. This year, we're focusing on the Lakewood neighborhood, which you see there on the left of the picture. And as you can see, we're resurfacing most of that entire neighborhood. We've also added Burwood, which is over there by Jackson and Stadium as well. This isn't the only work we're doing through the 2024 resurfacing program, because those streets on the previous slide that were bond funded streets are also being included in this contract as well. Okay, we have some major street projects this year as well. The Hill Street project, which is the second half of the Hill and State project that started last year, is already underway. They're out there installing water main right now. If you've tried to drive anywhere through that area, you probably know that. We also have Miller coming up. That hasn't quite gone out to bid yet, but it should be going out very shortly. We're not sure the full limits of that are Newport down to Chapin. We're not sure if we're going to be able to get that all done in 1 year, because it's going out a little bit late. If we don't, then the first phase of that will be from Newport down to 7th, and we'll do the next part of that in the spring of 25. But that'll be water main, storm sewer, full resurfacing, and then kind of as part of that as well, there's the cycle track too that we've been talking about. So that's still working on all the details of that. And then there's also the 7th Greenview project. We've presented on that before. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but that will be happening this year as well. And then let's see, just a couple more slides here. I mentioned those local street utility projects and resurfacing as well. These are just some examples of that. The primary ones we have going on this year. The Crescents neighborhood, as we call it, Saunders Crescent, Hatcher Crescent, Argyle Crescent, all of those up north of Miller. That entire neighborhood's getting new water main, and the roads will get treated as well. And then we got some work down in the Yorkshire Independence Medford area, down near Manchester and Stadium. Same type of work going on there. And then, as promised, talking a little bit about speed management on some of these local streets as well. Just to mention first, real quickly, the 7th and Greenview, which is the ones in blue there on the right-hand side of the right-hand circle. Again, I presented that we've presented on these before, so I won't go into too much detail, but those mainly involve road narrowing, bump outs, some sidewalk improvements, crosswalk improvements through that neighborhood, and that went through a lengthy engagement process on that as well. So that will be coming up starting in a few weeks here. And then looking back at the resurfacing projects, the ones in red there over on the left, we looked at, as we're looking at opportunities for speed management in these areas in that Lakewood neighborhood, we particularly identified those 2 long streets that go in and out of Lakewood Elementary there. One's Gray Lake. I don't remember the name of the other one. Mason, maybe. But those long straight streets we immediately identified as potential candidates that could use some treatments. We did do a speed study out there. Somewhat surprisingly, there wasn't actually a speeding problem in that area, but being that those streets were leading directly into the school, we decided to add some treatments in that area as well. We're going to be putting some bump outs in those areas on those 2 streets, filling a little bit of sidewalk gap right on one of those intersections as well. But then we're also, and I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but in this area up where the signal into this neighborhood is off of Jackson, There's like a Y intersection there where Lakeview Drive splits off of High Lake. And we're going to be reconfiguring that intersection so that tees up, so that Lakeview will tee up into High Lake, and make people, slow down to make a 90-degree turn instead of being able to fire right off, without having to slow down. So we also looked at Burwood. Now, being that Burwood is a fairly straight cut through between Jackson and Liberty, we anticipated there could be some speeding issues there. Did a speed study there, and indeed there were definitely some speeding issues in that area. So that area is going to get some speed humps, some bump out and curb extension as well. We also did find that there were some requests dating back quite a ways on that one as well. So those are some of the highlights of what we're looking to do with some of our local street speed management things, along with our projects this year. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. And I will open it up for questions now, but I'll also mention too, if you have further questions about street resurfacing projects, that's not my email address on the screen there, but you can send them to resurfacing@a2gov.org, or you can send them to me too. And that's kind of where we're funneling a lot of our resurfacing related questions. So with that, I will open it up for questions, and I will stop sharing here so that I can see you all. Okay.
Thanks, Nick. First up, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Nick. A couple questions. First, you mentioned Miller and the cycle track and proposed reconfigurations were a discussion item at the last meeting. Does the resurfacing that's being proposed have any kind of bearing related to that? Or the thought in my mind is like, does it make sense to do that if a reconfiguration is coming later, or is one? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. The good thing about that is that we can go ahead, put the water main in, put all the storm sewer work in that we're doing, pave the road. The cycle track treatment is something that is really going to go on the surface. So we can get all of that work done. That's the way we would have been doing it regardless. So getting the resurfacing done, is something we can do regardless and independent of getting the cycle track put in.
Okay, great. And my second question relates specifically to the Burwood project. So I know that I'm wondering what the outcomes or results were of the feedback survey that closed March 1st, or if we'll hear about those at all.
I don't have answers to that right here in front of me. So I don't have the details for that to share with you this evening, but I can make a note of that and share them with the commission.
Okay. And I know I think there's an open house for that one coming up in early April. And maybe a general question is to what extent, I know we have a preliminary plan for Burwood. To what extent do you anticipate any community feedback from the open house or survey would impact the final plan?
I'm unfortunately, I haven't been involved in the details of this myself, so I don't have a lot of that information. Generally speaking, I guess I would say that, based on based on what is in the council resolution that was passed back in September, it kind of leaves it up to staff to identify, if there's a need for traffic calming devices. We're likely going to put them in. There's, based on feedback from the neighborhood, we could tweak things here and there. But I don't think it's going to allow for like a neighborhood veto, for example.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Erica?
Yeah, thanks. Great to see all this work. The Sister Lakes area is just an area that I had a question around. And I suspect their association has provided a lot of feedback into this already. But I know that when I have, they've taken me out for a couple of walkabouts, and one of the things that has been brought up is just a lot of folks are walking down along for Sister Lake. That's a lot of parkland that's right there. There aren't sidewalks. It is somewhat curvy. There had been questions about whether or not the city might be able to do something like almost like what we do with protected bike lanes, put up some bollards and kind of make a makeshift walking area or something as an interim measure. I don't know if those are conversations that were had as part of this process, or if we have, just specifically, what was considered potentially for along the parkland and the lake there.
Yeah, it hasn't really that hasn't really been something that has surfaced as a high priority.
Mm-hmm.
A good chunk of drawing a blank on the name of that street that runs along the park there.
Park, I think maybe.
Yeah, a lot of the names in that neighborhood sound the same, so I keep mixing them up. But there's a lot of it. A lot of that road is actually not on this. It's one of the few ones that's actually in halfway decent condition, and we're doing a little bit of like mill and fill work up in the northern block, but most of it's actually not part of this program. So yeah, it hasn't really come up, and I'm not sure that it would really, something like that would really rise as a super high priority.
I noticed from the neighborhood perspective, I understand how maybe from the street resurfacing component and for this project level. And I guess just a confirmation on this one, because such a large stretch of that area is parkland. If sidewalks were to go in there, does that come out of the parks budget, or?
It would, yeah. If we were to build sidewalk on the west side of that street, where the parkland is, that would come out of parks budget. So, I mean, that would have to be something that would be prioritized through parks, really more so than, because the sidewalk millage wouldn't be paying for that. And now, if we were going to be building sidewalks on the east side of that road, that would be a different story. So,
okay.
All right, Peter.
I've got a question about how we know when it's time to replace a particular piece of curb. I watched on Scioto Church when they were doing that, and it seemed like they dug up some pieces of curb that were not in bad shape and left some that were in bad shape. And as a resident watching that, I was never sure, like, you want me to point that out now? I don't want to necessarily be following along behind you guys and saying you missed one, but there were a few instances where I did. So what's our standard for how bad is bad enough to decide that we're going to replace curb?
Well, there's some different factors that go into that. Generally speaking, we're trying to make our road dollars stretch as far as we possibly can. So we are trying to limit the amount of curb that we remove and replace on these resurfacing projects, especially within the neighborhoods. I can't say exactly on Scioto Church how, each individual piece of curb was determined on that, but in general, if the curb is functional, if it's, the main purpose of the curb is to drain the storm runoff that comes off of the road, and if it's functioning for that purpose, then we will often leave it alone. Sometimes they're disintegrated just to the point where the curb is barely even there anymore, and that's obviously going to get replaced. But sometimes the replacements are done more for maintaining drainage than they are for just the condition of the concrete itself.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd like to hear a standard that's something like, a crack that's longer than X or wider than Y, or a percentage of a curb that is disintegrated, or a curb has sunk more than X inches. Like, these are the kinds of standards that I would like to see applied to a curb. And I guess I'd also like to offer up my experience as a road user that there's two other things that I count on curbs to do. And one of them is they're the surface that's immediately adjacent to where I'm riding my bike in the bike lane. So I want them to be smooth enough so that if my bike ends up in them, that I don't have a wreck. And then I also appreciate that curbs act to keep cars where they belong in the street and off of places where they don't belong when things go wrong. So those are two other functions of curbs that I think we should be considering beyond the water drainage. So reasons why I would like curbs that are in good condition. So.
All right, Lisa.
I will note I'm quite pleased to hear about the improvements to the intersection of High Lake and Lakeview. This is a neighborhood that is near my home and that I travel frequently, taking my child to school. And, you know, I've personally observed quite a bit of sometimes confusion when you have two drivers approaching the High Lake Jackson intersection and who gets to merge where. So thank you for that. I'm wondering if I note there are a number of sidewalk gaps still remaining on the east side of High Lake, and I'm wondering if any sidewalk gap filling had been considered for 2024 as, you know, related to this project or separately.
Yeah, we did look at that. And I don't know how much you know about our system for developing determining sidewalk gaps, but we do have a prioritization system. Generally, they did not score very high in this neighborhood. We would be looking at them being over a certain threshold before we consider including them in the project. And unfortunately, the ones in this area didn't. I think it's there's one gap along Gray Lake that, while it didn't score very high, was the only gap along there. And that's that's the main route into the school. It was a low cost thing. So we are adding a little bit right along there. Again, it comes down to, we've only got so much money and we have to prioritize where we're spending it. So a lot of the sidewalk gaps here didn't just get up to that threshold.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I guess I'm curious, Nick, the pie-shaped wedges splitting the city into, I think, 8 segments. Is that a fairly new way that you guys have organized the neighborhood street resurfacing program?
In the grand scheme of things, I would say it's relatively new. I think we've been using that system for maybe the last 4 or 5 years, around maybe a little bit longer than that, 5 or 6 years maybe. I don't remember exactly when it was developed, but we're actually in the process this summer of redeveloping that. Excuse me. And we're looking to give it a little bit more granularity and actually break those areas down into smaller divisions, so that when we go to determine an area and say, hey, in 2027, we're going to be in this area right here, it's a little bit more tighter. So the expectations of like, oh yeah, there really is a chance that they're going to be in this area. As you can see, what we can afford to do this year is most of the Lakeview neighborhood. That's a very small percentage of the city. So we are working on that to try to get a map that's maybe a little bit more informative into the future.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted that to kind of address people's questions about, if there's 8 segments, then theoretically every 8 years my neighborhood should have been considered, but it hasn't been for decades. And so
right.
I wanted to get that out there, that this system's been around for half a decade or so. So
yeah, I think the new system, once we develop it, will have like 16 divisions instead of 8. So okay. Which is more realistic.
All right. Maybe another agenda topic there, Raymond. Keep that in mind. All right, thanks. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thanks as always, Nick, for that presentation.
You're welcome.
Every year. All right, next up is signalized intersections and non-motorized users. In the development of the annual work program, the Transportation Commission requested a presentation by staff on what considerations and accommodations are made for pedestrians and bicyclists at signalized intersections. So Luke Liu will give an overview of this topic and then answer questions from the commission. Luke?
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Luke Liu. For those commissioners I haven't met before or the broader audience, I'm part of engineering. I'm one of the transportation engineers with the city, and I do spend a good portion of my work time with traffic signals, and I report to Raymond Hess. So today we'll take a look at a general overview of pedestrian services at signalized intersections. This presentation has this 5 sections, marked crosswalks and diagrams showing conflicting movements and safety performance. The first 3 altogether, just a couple slides, and then the bulk of the presentation will be focusing on existing practice in the city. And the last slide will take a look at the future work that's on our work plan. For marked crosswalks, the first kind is uncontrolled crossing. What's shown on the right, the top picture is a mid-block crossing. This is on Fletcher. It's a marked crosswalk with crosswalk signage. At this location, there's really not a turning movement between motor vehicles and pedestrians. The bottom half of the slide shows a picture that is a stop-controlled intersection. So at this intersection, there is always stop control. So under this condition, motor vehicle drivers are required to stop at the intersection and only proceed when it's that user's turn and there's not a conflict in the crosswalk. Moving on to the next slide. On the top, we have a picture showing an RRFB, which stands for Rectangular Rapid Flashing Beacon. So this is a mid-block crosswalk along Huron Parkway. It's on the east side of Huron High School. This one is RFB equipped crosswalk. There's really not a conflict between a turning motor vehicle and pedestrian. The bottom of the slide is showing a traffic signal equipped intersection. So at this intersection, we do have a marked crosswalk, and also turning vehicles in this case would be controlled by traffic signal before it can clear the intersection. In the next slide, this intersection shown on the screen is Eisenhower and Northbrook. At this intersection, we do have RRFB for all the crossings for crossing Eisenhower. So this is a type of control where the intersection is under sign control. Then the left turn driver will still need to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. Next, we'll take a look at a couple of diagrams showing the type of conflict between turning vehicles and pedestrian users and the bicycle users. So on this slide, the right half of the slide is showing a diagram with a left turning motor vehicle and a right turning motor vehicle. From the perspective of the driver of the left turning vehicle, the potential conflict is with the opposing through traffic, which is not shown on this chart. And what's marked on the chart is the conflict point between the turning vehicle and the bicycle user, and also the pedestrian user in the crosswalk. This diagram also shows a right turning vehicle and the potential conflict points with bicycle users in the bike lane and pedestrian users in the crosswalk. So this is from the view of motor vehicle drivers. From the view, now we're moving on to the next slide. From the view of non-motorized users, the potential conflict does come from both the left turning vehicle and the right turning vehicle. So if we take a look at the diagram shown here, for the same pedestrian in the crosswalk, there is conflict from the left turning vehicle and right turning vehicle. The same is for the bicycle users. Okay. Then we'll move on to take a quick look of the safety performance of our system. So we scanned crash data, reported crash data from the beginning of 2014. So this data set covers slightly over 10 years worth of reported crash data. We first filtered for fatal and A-level or serious injury crashes that involves pedestrian users. Altogether, for this period, we have 12 fatal crashes and 82 A-level injury crashes. Then for the interest of this topic, we further screened those crashes for those that only involve a turning motor vehicle at signalized intersection. So in this case, we come down to 1 fatal crash and 16 A-level injury crash. Then there's some more signal-related technical terms here. That's permissive only. So the 1 fatal pedestrian-involved crash at signalized intersection, the motor vehicle was under permissive only mode, meaning it requires the driver to observe and yield to the pedestrian in the crosswalk. And for the 16 A-level injury crashes, 14 of those are under permissive only service, and 2 of those are under permissive and protected mode, meaning for 1 signal cycle, a portion of the signal cycle requires driver to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk, and for another portion of the cycle, the driver is provided with a protected turning duration where the driver just needs to follow the signal indication. Of course, for any reason, if there is non-motorized users in the vehicle's path, the driver should still yield to the non-motorized user. I just moved on to the next slide. This is very similar to the previous slide. The difference is that in this slide, we're looking at bicycle users involved crashes. The same data collection period, a little bit over 10 years, there were a total of 5 fatal crashes involved bicycle users, and 36 crashes involved A-level injuries to the bicycle users. When we screen this group of crashes to those involving motor vehicles turning at signalized intersection, there was not a fatal level crash. And for A-level injuries, there are 5 crashes. 3 of those involved permissive only signal treatment, and 2 of those involved permissive and protected treatment. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. This is where we start looking into the existing practice in our system. This slide shows pedestrian signal equipment and how we operate these equipment. For equipment, first, when there's at a crosswalk or at an intersection or an intersection that does not have marked crosswalk, at these locations, there's no pedestrian signal provided. Then for locations with marked crosswalk, we do have pedestrian signals. We also have locations where we have no push buttons. If there is no pedestrian push button, pedestrian services must be automatic. Then we have intersections with push buttons. For this group, there are 2 kinds. For some intersections, we have the APS, which is accessible pedestrian signal. And some other crosswalks, we have non-APS versions of the push button. For an intersection, for a given intersection, either all push buttons are APS or they're all non-APS. There's really not a mix of these buttons at one given location. As to the operations of pedestrian signals, some parameters that's on our radar is whether the pedestrian intervals are automatically recalled or they require user activation. Another parameter is leading pedestrian interval. Leading pedestrian interval means pedestrian walk indication is given a few seconds before the parallel motor vehicle indication is given a green. So that does allow the pedestrian users to start crossing a little bit sooner so that their visibility is enhanced for approaching drivers. A third parameter for pedestrian operations is the exclusive pedestrian phase, also known as pedestrian scramble or barn stance. We did start deploying exclusive pedestrian phase at 3 intersections along State Street between the 3 locations are State Street at William, North University, and Liberty. Then we'll take a look at some field examples. So when I prepared for this presentation, one intersection came to mind that's going to show up a couple of times in this presentation is Eisenhower and this Industrial. First, we use this intersection to demonstrate marked crosswalk and non-marked crosswalk. For the west leg, marked as the red frame in this slide, that's the west leg of the intersection. It does not really have a marked crosswalk. There's no curb ramp, so there's no pedestrian signal for this crossing. Then for the other 3 legs, they're marked with green frames. There are marked crosswalks, curb ramps, and pedestrian signals. There are also push buttons for these crossings. Okay. On the next slide, we'll take a look at left turn signal equipment and how the left turn signal equipment are operated. On the left side of this slide, I'm showing 3 possible signal configuration for left turn movement. They're labeled A, B, C, Ds. For option A, this is really a 3-section circular traffic signal, red, yellow, and green. This is not really for a left turn signal. This is for through movement. But I place it here to, as some intersections, they do not have a specific or dedicated left turn signal. So in those cases, users will follow the indication that's specific for through movement. And in this case, on the right-hand side of the slide, the labels A, B, C, D correspond to the same label on the left side. And for operations, these labels also correspond to each other. So with label A, this option, there's no dedicated left turn signal, then the type of operations is permissive only. Now we move on to talk about option B here. For option B, it's also a 3-section traffic signal assembly. In this case, the color stays the same, red on top, yellow in the middle, green on the bottom, and the shape of the lengths are all arrows. They all pointing to the left. In this case, we call this the 3-section left turn signal. For operations, this type of signal equipment is tied to protected only turning movement. We'll have other slides later on to go through the details of how the permissive and the protected mode is how they're going to work. Move on to talk about option C here. In this case, the signal assembly has 4 sections. The top 3 are the same as the circular option A there. The addition is that at the bottom of the 3 section, there is a 4th section. The 4th section is a green arrow pointing to the left. We call this option the 4th level green signal. With this signal equipment, it can be permissive and protected operations for the left turn. It can also be protected only. The last option for left turn signal, labeled letter D here. In this case, it's a 4-section signal assembly, solid red arrow on the top, and 2 yellow arrows in the middle, and 1 solid green arrow at the bottom. The difference between the 2 yellow arrows, the second one from the top is a steady yellow, and the third one from the top is a flashing yellow. So we started deploying this type of treatment at our intersections from a few years back. This left turn signal does allow permitted and protected mode for the left turn movement. We call this the flashing yellow arrow signal here. So among these options, some of them are capable of omitting the permissive duration. Some others are not capable of doing that. In the next few slides, we're going to take a look at that. So the reason I mentioned the intersection of Eisenhower and industrial is that it has quite a few combinations of the left turn treatments at one location. Typically, that's not the case. Typically, we may have all the left turns being permissive or some of those being protected, but this intersection does have the combination of 3 options here. So we'll use this one as example. Okay. Next slide. We'll first take a look at intersections that does not have dedicated left turn signal. In this case, the right-hand side has 2 diagrams showing different signal indications in a signal cycle. The top one shows that motor vehicle indication is red, and the pedestrian signal is solid, do not walk. So in this case, no users from this approach is serviced, and they need to wait at the intersection to the moment they receive their indications or their walk or green indications. The bottom diagram on this slide shows that motor vehicle indications turned green, and pedestrian indication turned walk. So in this case, there's really not a left turn specific traffic signal. Left turn drivers will need to yield to the opposing through traffic, right turning traffic, and also users in the bicycle lane and crosswalk. Many of our downtown intersections have this type of configuration, and there are certain intersections along our commuting corridors also have the same setup. Moving on to the next slide, which is just one addition to the previous one to indicate how the leading pedestrian interval works. Here, comparing to the previous slide, we have inserted another one in the middle. So the middle slide shows that while the motor vehicle indication stays red, we do have the pedestrian indication showing a walk. So in this case, this combination is only present at the intersection for a few seconds, namely 3 to 5 seconds. The idea is to get the pedestrian into the crosswalk so they're more visible to turning motor vehicles. So that's the LPI here. The city did implement the LPI during the pandemic at all city intersections or city signalized intersections. There are a couple MDOT intersections through different projects. We did request and receive approval to install leading pedestrian interval at several MDOT intersections. So in the following slides, like the presentation will not specific show LPI, even though they do exist at our intersections. So this is a field example showing left turn movements that are all permissive only. So this picture shows an overview of the intersection of Packard and the Fernwood. At the bottom, there's a screenshot of the street view of the same intersection. The camera is looking east, so this is an eastbound approach. Yeah, just as shown here, the signal indications are for the through movement only, and the left turn vehicles or left turn drivers, they need to observe the through movement signal indication and yield to opposing motor vehicles as well as non-motorized users in the crosswalk and the bicycle lane. Okay. Then we'll move on to talk about how left turn signals work when the signal is equipped with three-section signal assembly. In this case, the top chart shows that motor vehicle indications, whether it's a through movement or left turn movement, they're all red. And the pedestrian signal is showing solid do not walk. Moving on to the next duration of the signal cycle, the left turn motor vehicle indication turns green while the pedestrian walk indicate or the pedestrian indication stays solid do not walk. In this case, it's a protected movement for the left turning vehicles. As the signal cycle goes on, the left turning signal indication turns red, and the through motor vehicle signal shows green, and the walk indication is given to pedestrian users, so that there's really not a conflict between pedestrian users and turning motor vehicles here. As to a field example, we come back to the intersection of Eisenhower and Industrial. The westbound approach and northbound approach at this intersection, they both have the three-section signal head. They receive the protected only treatment. Then we move on to talk about left turn signals with the fourth level green arrow. So we have three charts on the right-hand side to show the sequence of the signal changes in the signal cycle. In this case, when motor vehicle indication turns green, pedestrian signal also turns a walk. So in this case, left turn motor vehicles, they need to yield to pedestrian and bicyclists. At the next phase of the signal cycle, the pedestrian signal turns to solid do not walk, and the fourth level green arrow lights up to indicate it is a protected portion of the movement. So in this case, the fourth level green arrow, it can be operated in either protected only mode, or it can be operated in permissive and protected mode. Depends on how the intersection is configured. In this case, drivers need to follow the signal indication and also yield to pedestrians. And there's one limit, is that this left turn signal configuration cannot omit the permissive portion for the left turn. Then as to a field example, we come back to Eisenhower and industrial. In this case, the southbound approach is equipped with the 4th level green arrow. And at this intersection, it's operating in the protected only mode. Then we move on to take a look at the flashing yellow arrow left turn assembly. In this case, when some signal on the approach turns green or walk, vehicle indication receives a green indication. Walk or pedestrian signal receives a walk indication, and the left turn signal goes to a flashing yellow, indicating this is a permissive portion of the operations. Then moving on to the next phase of the cycle, after motor vehicle indication turns red and pedestrian signal turns to solid do not walk, the left turn movement receive a green arrow indication for left turn. So with the flashing yellow arrow assembly, it is capable of omitting the permissive portion, and we will take a look at that next. A field example of flashing yellow arrow coming back to Eisenhower and industrial, the eastbound left turn movement has this signal assembly. Moving on to the next slide, this one shows how the signal works when that's also with flashing yellow arrow, but the capability for omitting the permissive portion is turned on. In this case, the top chart shows that motor vehicle signal indications are all red, and pedestrian signal indication are all solid do not walk. As the signal cycle goes on, there are 2 options here, either number two or number 3. Depends on if there is a pedestrian actuation requesting pedestrian service. The one on the left is showing that when pedestrian is present at the intersection requesting the service, the pedestrian signal displays a walk-in indication. In this case, the left turn motor vehicle signal stays red. And on the right-hand side, it shows the option that when no push button is activated, then in this case, the permissive portion of the left turn is displayed. Drivers are allowed to make a left turn. After this duration is complete, the next signal phase is protected only portion for the left turn movement. There's one consideration here. While we do have the capability to omit the flashing yellow arrow or the permissive portion of the left turn, we do need to consider whether the crosswalk signal is automatically serviced. If we recall that service, meaning there's automatic service every cycle, then effectively that's omitting the flashing yellow arrow in all the signal cycles. It's very possible the flashing yellow will never show up. An example of this operations is the intersection of Main and Stadium. So on this slide, we do have the signal head for the left turn stay in all red. And on the left-hand side, we see there is a pedestrian in the crosswalk. Okay. We're nearing the end of the presentation. Before that, we take a look at the bicycle signal. Right now, there are 2 intersections in the city boundary. Both of those are under MDOT jurisdiction, First and Huron, Division Huron. So we do have bicycle signals installed at these 2 intersections. So the way the bicycle signal works is that the bicycle signal indication and the pedestrian signal, they are going to first service simultaneously, meaning bicycle will receive a green and the pedestrians receive a walk. while the motor vehicle indication stays red. Then after this phase, the bicycle signal would turn to red, and pedestrian users continue to receive a walk, and motor vehicle indication will turn green. So the reason we are it's configured this way is that so on this slide on the left-hand side is showing a diagram of conflicting points. So for left turn drivers trying to make a left turn, and so this intersection does have bicycle track, meaning there are bidirectional bicycle users on one side of the street. So it's possible that while the left turning motor vehicle driver is observing for opposing through traffic and other users coming from the front, there could be another bicycle user coming from behind. So the signal is configured in this case to mitigate this conflict. And in the city, started from 2016, we started installing hemispherical video detection systems. We first tried the first system at the intersection of Main Stadium to make sure the new technology is sound before we expand its footprint. Our expanded deployment really started after 2 years of trial use. So right now we have 48 intersections equipped with a hemispherical video detection system. The advantage of this is that it's installed on the roadside, so there's not any element of the system that's in the pavement. And also the video-based detection system can detect bicycle users. There is development at this stage to also cover pedestrian users, but that portion is not proven to be reliable yet. So we're part of the experiment, and yeah, we'll decide on whether when time is right for detecting pedestrians at the intersections. Then we're coming to the final slide of this presentation. For future work, we are exploring all the possible opportunities to expand the installation of APS, accessible pedestrian signal. And also we are exploring resources to upgrade pedestrian signal heads, so they include the countdown function. Over the past several years, our deployment for RFBs have always been a couple intersections or mid-block locations every year, and we'll continue on that to expand RFB installations. Bicycle signals is also on our radar, as we do have projects to expand our bicycle network. Bicycle signals are a treatment we are considering. Flashing yellow arrows and the treatment of omitting the permissive portion using flashing yellow signal equipment, that's another item on our list. And last, it's for near miss analytics. So this is a task that's under the Safe Street for All award and the project. Well, right now we're relying on reported crash data and staff observation. The near miss analytics will allow us to tap into the near miss events, and hopefully that's going to give us more clue as to how we can operate the system better. So that concludes the presentation, and I can take questions, and hopefully I can address some of those.
Thank you very much. First up is Julie.
Hi, thanks for that presentation. It was really interesting. Can you tell me more about how the near miss analytics work? How will you find out about near misses?
For sure. We are using, well, we plan to use existing equipment, the existing video-based detection system. So the technology will look at the detection from the cameras and take a look at the conflicting points and how the users, how close they come to each other. Right now, the technology is still relatively new, so it's an experiment, and we need to first take a look at how the data will show up, and then really draw some threshold and see how many reports we're getting for different types of conflicts. The range of conflicts can be really wide. It can cover conflicts between motor vehicles. It can cover conflicts between motor vehicles and non-motorized users. Right now, not many agencies have experience with that. So this is going to be a fairly early deployment for this type of technology.
So are you saying this happens just at specific intersections that have the equipment installed?
Yes. So as we are only relying on existing cameras, that means it's going to be one of the 48 intersections that we have at this point. So the study period is going to be 2 to 3 years. So our camera footprint will also expand in this time. So that means we do have the opportunity to cover more locations than the existing 48.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Erica?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that thorough presentation. It's very interesting. A couple of questions. I was hoping you could go back into, this may be covered in the future work in terms of the eliminating the conflict during the pedestrian signal, but I was trying to remember back to the pedestrian crash slides that you had up at the very beginning of the
sorry for the flicker.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah. And so if I'm understanding that correctly, if I'm inferring things, it's when you have that protected signal, it appears that we're having much fewer pedestrian crashes at the type A level, and that is providing a significant benefit for pedestrians. Is the future work around transitioning more to that protected signal? Can you help me understand that better?
This is, I guess, from the crash perspective, we want to take a look at how recorded crash data is showing up. So this is primarily showing for permissive only treatment. So with the history crash, the majority of them happen when it's a permissive movement. Whether that permissive movement is without a left turn traffic signal or it's with. So in this case, it's showing that for the majority of these, they are under permissive only, meaning there's simply not a left turn signal treatment. So we do have desire, and of course, we'll have to look at intersections as they fit to explore ways to install flashing yellow arrow, meaning that that type of equipment will provide the capability to provide either permissive and protected, or it's the same type of operations, but with the capability to omit the permissive portion when pedestrian users are present.
And are these crashes further analyzed so we know whether they're left-hand turn crashes or right-hand turn?
The fatal one is a left-hand turn. I think the majority of these are left-hand turn crashes.
I assume because they're A, but I just wanted to
right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the question I would have as we transition is, is that are we getting a lot more benefit from the fully protected versus sort of the flashing yellow, and how we gather more data around that. And then the second question I have is just regarding the leading pedestrian interval. You mentioned that some of the MDOT intersections have that, and we've applied to and gotten authorization. Has MDOT turned down any requests that we've put in around leading pedestrian intervals, or how do we determine when to make that request?
From the MDOT feedback, the most that we have heard is that for location, this is where LPI and APS come together, meaning that in the response from MDOT that if an intersection is equipped with push buttons or better APS, then they are more likely to approve the installation of LPI. And the logic behind it, that is that if there's no push button, that means the LPI is present in every signal cycle. With push button, the LPI is only present when there are users there.
Okay. And I guess, are we being selective in terms of when we're putting in those requests to MDOT, or is that a very labor-intensive request to be going through?
Well, it's really a changing pattern from several years ago. At the very beginning, it's a one-off request when we hear from the public. Right now, if there's a project, we just automatically request for that whole project. Actually, it's becoming a more frequent conversation now, and that is aware that we have blanket desire to install LPI at all the intersections.
Okay.
Thank you.
Peter?
Hi, thanks for this presentation. There's a lot of good information in it. So, looking at this slide, we see permissive only intersections have 14 A-level crashes, and permissive plus flashing yellow arrow have 2. But without knowing how many of each kind of intersection there is and the traffic volume in them, we can't normalize that. That could mean that we don't have many flashing yellow arrow intersections, or it could mean that we don't have a lot of crashes in them. Are you following me there? So I don't know how much we can draw from the fact that there's only 2 crashes in the flashing yellow arrow intersections.
Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit more as to the point?
Sure. If there was only one flashing yellow arrow intersection in the whole city, we probably wouldn't have many crashes there. So without knowing the comparison of the traffic volume that goes through flashing yellow arrow intersections and permissive only intersections, it's tough to say that 2 is better than 14. If there's only one intersection that has a flashing yellow arrow and it has and it had 2 crashes, but there's 100 permissive only intersections, then it could be that 2 is worse than 14, because we had 2 at one intersection instead of 14 crashes over 100 intersections. So
I see the point now. Yes, continue, please.
So that's a thing that concerns me. I mean, when we're looking at this data, the other thing is that these flashing yellow arrows appear to be, to me, by my experience, relatively new. Like I think the one I'm most familiar with on Scioto Church only got installed in like 2018 or 2019. And so we're beginning to see crashes and get reports of near misses from people from these flashing yellow arrow intersections as they get rolled out. One that comes to mind is the intersection of Depot and North Main. There was a near miss there that was reported by Jonathan Levine in a C-click fix, and the flashing yellow arrow now gets canceled when there's a pedestrian interaction. A pedestrian pushes the button at that intersection, and so that's good. The problem is that at that same intersection, a cyclist was hit by a car making a left turn in a flashing yellow arrow. There's no way for a cyclist in the bike lane to cancel that flashing yellow arrow. So I want very much, wherever possible, like Scioto Church and 7th, for example, we have the buttons there. I want the flashing yellow arrow canceled when people push the buttons, like as soon as possible. I think that needs to be our default everywhere. Where we don't have it, we need to get it ASAP. I think we need to think very carefully about installing any more flashing yellow arrows. If we do install a flashing yellow arrow, it has to cancel. It has to cancel when we push the button right out of the gate. But I think that we need to be having more of a conversation about whether we want to use these at all. And going back to the example of North Main and Depot, we fixed it for the pedestrian condition, but we didn't fix it for the cyclist, and we really let down the person who was in a crash and seriously injured. So I don't know what the steps are to make that happen, but to me it feels like at a place like Scioto Church, this is a software change or a PLC change to the signal. Like when I push the button, it needs to cancel it. Can we get a work plan for how long it's going to be before we identify all of the intersections that are capable of doing it and that we have it complete? That needs to be a very high priority, I think.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback and question. So in terms of the volume and footprint, the heaviest volume in the city, well, in terms of motor vehicles, those are the major MDOT trunk lines. They are a little bit different sometimes as to non-motorized users. So namely, the most heavily traveled Washtenaw, Huron, Jackson, that's the east-west direction, and north-south, that's North Main Street. We do have some other, like Ann Arbor, Saline, that's a major commuting corridor that's under the city jurisdiction. So in terms of the number of flashing yellow arrows, they were rolled out over the last few years. Ellsworth has several. Eisenhower has maybe 2 now, Eisenhower and Packard. Then Plymouth Road does not really have many yet. So Jackson has some. So we do have a few number of intersections that has the flashing yellow arrow. But it's worth noting another point is that the signal equipment that's flashing yellow arrow is relatively new. But the type of operations using permissive and protected, that's not new. So the type of signal equipment predates the flashing yellow arrow is the flashing red ball. So that one was installed. It's kind of unique in the state of Michigan, and we did have that for a fairly long time. I cannot really name or number how many, but before that, yes, we did have another type of signal providing the same type of operations. So most of those flashing red have been replaced with flashing yellow. There's still one last location that's near Washtenaw and Palmer that's still there. So that's on our list. We request MDOT to keep that on the radar. So the next time they have resource or they're doing a project, the last location can come out. Then I guess see as to the feature about omitting the permissive portion, that's part of the presentation. We talk about whether some intersections do have them, some others do not. We did start using that feature quite a lot, and the last 2 intersections, Main Stadium and Packard and Platt, when those flashing yellow arrows went in, we did automatically put in the omit feature to omit the permissive portion. Some other intersections where we have not done that, it's really a balancing of how we can better service the non-motorized users. So, like for the intersection of Eisenhower and Stone School, it is one of the numbers shown in the slide here. But right now we do have automatic recall to the pedestrian crosswalks. If we turn on the omit feature, that simply means that the flashing yellow arrow will never show up. So, do we wish to keep the automatic recall, or do we want to take that away and put in the omit feature for the permissive portion? So, so that's the kind of discussion we're having right now.
Just to reiterate about Scioto Church, I think that could happen tomorrow. It has the buttons. You don't get a walk signal without the buttons. You could you could omit the flashing yellow arrow tomorrow if you change the software. And I think that we need to go on this. Like, we need to do this right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a software change, and for intersections where we do not have the recall, yes, they should be turned on.
Okay, I'd like to know how many are like that. How many are like Scioto Church, and like when do we expect to have them all done? Like it feels to me like we could do them all this summer. So let's. Is that something we can follow up on in a later meeting, Brett and Raymond? To understand.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, we can give a status update in the monthly update.
That would be an excellent thing to add. That would be great. Thank you. And thanks again for this presentation. This is super informative. Really like it.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? All right, yeah. Again, thanks, Lou. I really appreciate the depth and all the discussion that you supported. So thanks for coming in and talking about this with us. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a bit long, and we'll follow up.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to follow up on those cases. All right. Next up is traffic calming and speed management. So changes to the traffic calming program were passed by City Council upon recommendation of this commission. And so right now, Raymond will give an overview of what staff has been working on since the passage of that resolution last year. Raymond?
All right, I'm getting to switch around different documents. Let's see, I think there we go. This is showing the traffic calming resolution implementation strategy. Do I get a thumbs up? Okay, thank you. All right, so again, just as a reminder, there was a resolution passed by City Council at the recommendation of the Transportation Commission to kind of rethink the traffic calming program. So there were several resolve clauses, which you'll see in this document. Staff had a series of several meetings since the passage of that resolution, and then we reconvened the traffic calming subcommittee of the Transportation Commission last month and kind of talked through some of these initial thoughts. So one of the things I'll note is, this document is stamped draft because we are still kind of thinking through it. We're continuing to refine the ideas, especially based on some of the feedback that we got from the subcommittee. So I'll just quickly run through these. I'll probably I probably won't read every word on there, but I want to highlight the kind of biggest things that might draw your attention or that you might find of interest. If I gloss over something that piqued your interest, by all means, please call that out and I can circle back on that. So the first resolve clause really talks about shifting the program away from a sort of city council approval for individual projects and that these are going to be staff administered now. So this first list of bullet points really kind of unpacks that. A lot of suggested changes we're thinking to the program that, it goes beyond just sort of a staff administered program. So the first is we think that maybe setting a minimum project area size would make sense. That seems to be a way that allows us and affords us the opportunity to put in multiple devices. We tend to space, especially vertical devices such as speed humps, between 200 and 300 feet apart at a minimum. So if we establish a minimum project area of 500 feet, that'll give us options, right? We can look at vertical devices, horizontal devices, so things you drive over, things you drive around. That's one of the kind of things we're looking at. This isn't a big departure from what's currently in there, but helps really solidify what we think could be an effective way to receive some of these requests. The next point I want to raise is probably one of the biggest ones that you might be interested in. One of the things that we're suggesting is raising the threshold for the percent of signatures required to qualify for traffic calming. And I'll touch on this a little bit later as well as to what our rationale is for it. But right now, the petition process allows for 50 plus one of petition, 50% plus one of the affected area can qualify you. But then, if you remember, we have sort of a scoring matrix that the higher percentage of signatures that you get, the more points you can get. So if you get kind of the bare minimum, you get, I forget how many points, qualifying points, like 5 points. But if you get 100% of signatures in your project area, you can get pretty much all the points to qualify. We're suggesting to eliminate all other qualifying criteria except for the signatures. So there's no longer speed, there's no longer volume criteria, there's no longer, proximity to destinations, some of those other things that you've seen me review in the past, that it would really just be the signatures that we receive. And part of the reason for this, as I'll talk about in just a minute, is now that the program dictates that if you qualify for traffic calming, you are getting traffic calming. We really thought that having a higher threshold of buy-in on the front end among the neighborhood would be good. That everybody who signs the petition understands and recognizes that something is going in. That this, right now, the way the process works out is, you might sign it, but then you kind of have that veto vote at the end. Well, that veto vote has been removed per, the resolution. So we thought that this kind of was a way to help strike a balance of eliminating all other qualifying criteria, but maybe raising the threshold, for the number of signatures required. Now, the subcommittee did raise, some thoughts that we want to keep an eye on. So, in areas of high rental, that might be hard bar to achieve. And so, there was some suggestion that we continue to monitor this space. And when we talk to petitioners, if they're having a hard time getting this going, we can revisit this issue in the future. I will say, if you aren't aware, we do try to facilitate the gathering of signatures for petitioners. We will help them set up online surveys that can count towards signatures, and we'll even help them with postcards and a whole bunch of other things as well. And then, the subcommittee also mentioned that, there are other ways to get traffic calming. Like you heard Nick Hutchinson speak earlier about, some of the capital projects that are incorporating traffic calming as a matter of course, which again is a result of this resolution. Another thing we talked about is maybe trying to streamline the process a little bit, putting a lot of information on the front end as part of the qualifying petition so that we understand what some of the pain points are among the neighborhood, and then that will help us really refine some of the initial starter ideas. And then we can go from, the initial questionnaire into a preliminary suggested plan and self-guided tour, do the workshop to discuss all of that, make refinements, and then implement it, and then follow up with the residents a year later to see what their impressions are about those deployments. Some of these are just kind of operationally, we'll need to update some of the documents. We'll need to update the guidebook and the website and some of those as well. We are still treating what I will call grandfathered petitions, petitions that came in under the old petition process. We're still following that old petition process. And anything that came in after September, we've kind of indicated to them that there might be changes in terms of how their petitions are processed. So we're trying to just make sure that that's clear for everybody. We had a little bit of discussion about feedback signs in the neighborhood. And we are looking at which tools we want to incorporate, based on the national best practices, which is again a function of the resolution, guiding us to NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and other documents. But we want to make sure that we pick devices that are effective in the long term. So this next bullet point, or the next resolve clause, talks about that, we will use a collaborative model for public engagement. Again, reading between the lines, what this means is the existing program is an empower model, which means the residents have the final vote on the plan. When we move to a collaborative model, the idea is that we work with the residents on the plan, but we will move forward without a final vote from them, which again, as I hinted earlier, this is another rationale for raising that signature threshold to 2/3. This also, in turn, just logistically means there is no final polling. That's right now, that's the final step, on the petition processes. Once we've kind of gone through and iterated a couple times, we send it out. That step is now removed. And then one of the things that the subcommittee brought up is, even though City Council and by extension, Transportation Commission are no longer part of the approval process for individual petitions, that we would still continue to report to you on them. And staff is fully committed to that we would, tell you which projects we're currently processing and what the outcome of those are and when they're scheduled for implementation. Probably would be done as part of the monthly report, similar to how we're doing now. You just wouldn't have action items that come before you as a matter of course in your packets. The next resolve clause talks about really trying to incorporate traffic calming elements as a matter of course for road resurfacing projects, or any time a capital project significantly disturbs the existing road surface. So again, you saw in Nick Hutchinson's presentation earlier that we have taken that to heart. We don't have active petitions on Burwood. We don't in the Lakewood neighborhood, but we are going ahead and putting in some traffic calming elements. Some of those are horizontal elements, like the things you drive around, like curb extensions or bump outs. Some of them are vertical elements, things you drive over, like speed humps. What we have indicated here is, and we've had a lot of internal discussion, even with the subcommittee, about what that threshold should be for automatic inclusion of a vertical device or something you drive over. And our initial thoughts right now are a line in the sand of 28 miles per hour. If we go out and we collect data on a roadway and we see that the 85th percentile is 28 miles per hour or over, then we will be proactive about putting in vertical elements, things you drive over, like speed humps. That's not to say that areas that don't have a posted or a 85th percentile speed of 28 miles per hour still may not get traffic calming elements. Like again, you heard from Nick, we did not observe speeding problems in the Lakewood neighborhood, but we are still doing some intersection reconfigurations to slow vehicles as they turn around corners and putting in some bump outs, especially near the schools. The subcommittee did raise a question about, sometimes the pavement condition can actually exacerbate speeds. So, sometimes if we collect data beforehand, if the road is riddled with potholes, that may not be the experience once the road is resurfaced. It's hard for us to predict what that change will be. We can maybe try to do some, this sounds more academic than I think we can afford, but some sort of like longitudinal exercise that if we collect data before, collect data after, maybe we can see what that impact is over time. But I think where we're at right now in the stage, it's hard for us to predict that. And I will note, and even we had a lot of internal discussion. The subcommittee has raised whether 28 miles per hour is the appropriate kind of threshold to consider vertical devices or not. So it is something that we're still trying to think through a little bit. Admittedly, 28 miles per hour is somewhat arbitrary. We felt 20 if folks are doing the posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour. By definition, there isn't a speeding problem. So it didn't seem appropriate to incorporate vertical elements, again, things you drive over. 30 felt too high, so we kind of looked at some midpoint, and that's how we arrived at 28. I won't admit that there's a lot of method to that madness aside from what I just explained. Some other things that we mentioned about how we might also look to focus in on areas for possible traffic calming is, yes, we can go out and collect speed data, but then do we also have a history of where there are past requests, or are there things identified in the transportation plan? Are there just other inputs that could help us inform that there's a desire among the neighborhood when we're in that neighborhood resurfacing that we can consider some additional traffic calming? And then again, you've already heard this report about how we're already trying to put that into action. The next resolve clause really talks about making sure we're using best practices. So again, a lot of that is kind of like what we're talking about above, but looking at the National Association of Transportation officials, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and Federal Highway Administration to really make sure that the tools we're using are kind of as up to date as possible. And then the second to last resolve clause talks about developing a school traffic calming toolkit by the end of this calendar year. We have started to engage the schools. We've just had some preliminary discussions. Staff internally kind of had some starter ideas that we floated with them. And I think a lot of the discussion right now is really about how do we define proximity to school? Are we going to define a perimeter like a buffer around a school, or are we going to let the school identify designated safe routes to school areas like walk routes and bike routes? And then we focus our attention there. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to really tease out working with the schools in terms of which is the best. And it may be a menued approach. In some instances, it may be, a defined area. In other instances, it may be beyond that defined area if they have a designated walking route, for example. We're also kind of thinking through or trying to be sensitive to, the needs around an elementary school might be different around the needs around a middle school, might be different around the needs from a high school. And what does that look like? And just trying to think through what that is. So there's still a lot of questions, I think, that we need to work through, especially working with the schools. We have some time, obviously, to continue to talk through this. But it is something we are, trying to start formulate some ideas around. The subcommittee gave us a lot of really good thoughts on this subject. Really, how are we defining those safe routes to schools? Should we also, consider private schools? What about daycares and preschools? Pick up and drop off areas, maybe beyond, the actual roadway or driveways into school, near remote drop offs. While that's technically not considered a traffic calming device, it really can have a traffic calming sort of effect because you're displacing some of the traffic that might otherwise be in the immediate vicinity of where kids are walking and biking. So that might be something, again, we can kind of factor into the school traffic calming toolkit that's a little different than the other traffic calming toolkit. I thought that was a really good recommendation from the subcommittee. And then, the subcommittee also was correct to point out that, it's not always just speed around schools. Sometimes it's bad behavior. For those of you who've ever seen morning drop off or afternoon pickup on Miller, people are parking in the bike lane. They're parking across the crosswalk. We get a lot of areas where parents are not behaving like adults, unfortunately, and not behaving appropriately. And so it's not just about speed. It's also about some bad behaviors among motorists. And then, just flagging some other opportunities about who we can work with. Again, these are recommendations from the subcommittee about Is it the school proper? Is it, administration? Is it the parent-teacher organizations? Or is it, the principals and things like that? So I think, again, these are great ideas for us to continue to tease out with the schools. There was also some discussion about, traffic calming petitions that are around, neighborhood initiated traffic calming petitions around schools, and what role the school can play in that. And we kind of clarified some of the engagement we currently do, but maybe we can reevaluate if that can be done a little bit differently. And, I'll just end on the school note that, in our initial discussions with Ann Arbor Public Schools, they are receptive to this, they are supportive, but they also are fairly limited in their capacity. So they're committed to working with us on this, but it will probably take some time to tease this out. So, we'll continue to work with them on it. And then the last resolve clause really, mentions that, we'll continue to vet these ideas with the subcommittee, which again, we've reconvened them in February, and we continue to refine this even further. We'll continue to engage them on this matter. So with that, that's what I wanted to show today. Again, I do want to underscore this is still a work in progress. I want to thank Councilmember Briggs, Councilmember Ackman, and Brett Hadamaki for their contribution on the subcommittee. As a reminder, Brett transitioned on when Molly transitioned off. So in absentia, I also want to thank Molly for her past contributions to this effort as well. And again, we still have some work to do, but some of the ideas are, I think, coming into focus.
Thanks, Chairman. Yep, I look forward to continuing this. All right. Moving on to staff report and updates. Raymond, that's you again.
That is me again, and I can be quicker on this one. All right. When Chris is out, it takes me a moment because I'm trying to put timestamps on when we get to these things, just so that if Chris needs to fill in notes on anything, he can do that. So that's what I'm doing when I'm switching screens. So thank you for your patience. All right. Okay. I think I'm sharing the right screen there. Transportation project update showing. Thumbs up. All right. Thank you. Okay. Street resurfacing work is scheduled to start next month. This applies to the leftover projects from 2023. But moving into the next round of projects for the 2024 projects, those will start a month later in May. Sidewalk gaps, the projects haven't changed, just some of the timelines have been updated. So Burwood is summer, fall, Ellsworth is this spring, Glendale Circle is summer, Page is late summer, fall, Stone School is summer, Sunnywood and Gray Lake is summer. Once we start getting contractors under a more definitive timeline, you'll start to see further refinement on when these are going to happen. State and Hill kicked off. You heard Nick allude to that earlier, and that is expected to go through August. East Medical Center Drive Bridge is expected to kick off next month. Miller Avenue project, we kind of talked about that already. We talked a lot about it last month, but there is active ongoing public engagement on this. We did have, we rolled out a lot of concepts at last week's downtown area circulation study and comprehensive plan workshop, got a lot of comments. There's also an informational YouTube video. There's a short feedback survey and a mapping tool where you can go and drop pins. And we also have a series of virtual office hours. The first one was last night, and the next one is coming up next week, midday. So check out the project website for more details. And then, as you already heard Nick kind of mention, that the project is going to be done in 2 phases, probably kicking off in June. But a lot of the majority of the project will probably happen in the following year, calendar year. Downtown area circulation study, kind of building off the Miller, since they were kind of joined at the hip, had very good participation at last week's workshops. We had 4 public workshops and a whole series of stakeholder meetings. The initial estimates are we had over 300 people attend those workshops. Lots of good sticky notes and feedback that we got. I believe the project website, you can still go in and see all those materials and continue to add sticky notes. I don't know how much longer those will be up though. Streetlight outages, 307 repairs so far by DTE. Traffic calming, Bird, Arella, and Henry, which you approved last month, will go to City Council in June. That's a function of really understanding what the budget is and how many projects we can support in the fiscal year 25. So that's why that's being scheduled for June. But Mershon, Warden, and Traver have kicked off their engagement, have their petition engagement. So all those first meetings are coming up. Mershon is tomorrow night. Warden is April 3rd, and Traver is April 4th. The annual snapshot. I want to see if this will. Does this drag over? Is it showing the screen? Okay, thank you. First of all, I don't know if the link actually worked in the PDF. Sometimes our programs, when we convert a Word document over to PDF, the hyperlink gets broken. So if the hyperlink was not working, let me know and we can send that out through a separate link. But the snapshot, you've seen a version of this last year. We're going to continue to update this. I'm just going to quickly scroll through it. And if you want a more in-depth dive on this in the future, we can come back. But again, the idea is to really start reporting out on a regular basis, well, on an annual basis, on the accomplishments related to the transportation plan. So, again, we're showing the crash trends. We report out on this separately, but obviously this is important to Vision Zero. So we want to make sure we continue to display this information. We also kind of show, how many of these crashes are involving vulnerable road users. Some of these graphics are taking a while to load. Don't know why. Whoops. I think it's too far. Okay, okay, there it is. Now it loaded. Just talks about, pretty much 50% of, the serious crashes did involve vulnerable road users. So that's definitely something we need to be continuing to make progress on. And we are mindful of it. The 2023 achievements, some of them we wanted to kind of, talk about the council sponsored actions. We want to talk about the grant awards, the technology and innovations that are happening, and then also the electrification. And so just really mentioning some of those things that have happened in those spaces. Then you get down into the mapping function, which kind of talks about all of the new facilities that were installed. We do have some call out buttons that kind of, summarize that. So 1.39 miles of sidewalk gaps were filled with 13 new crosswalks installed and 2 new accessible pedestrian service actuated head devices were installed. The bike network, there were 12.1 miles of bike facilities that were built or upgraded, and 21 bike intersections were improved last year. We launched the bicycle parking pilot and identified those locations. We talked about the traffic calming petitions that were processed last year and which ones were installed. And then after you get through those mapping exercises, and you can go through and kind of click on different things as well. It's kind of a nifty little feature, interactive. Then we get into project spotlights, which again, really just kind of call out some of the important projects that happened last year. So we focus on State Street, has a nice, picture, has a little brief description about what the project included. Talk about Sire Church Road. We talk about Division Street extension, the cycle track. We talk about the Platte Road project and the quick build projects that were implemented downtown. Then we also reached out to our partner agencies and asked for updates as well. So the DDA and the Ann Arbor Transportation Authority gave us some of those. So, the DDA and their bike counters and the AAA TA on some of the reconfigurations and working with them to make sure that we can continue to accommodate transit as well. We'll also kind of try to build out some of the things that don't fit great into other boxes. So, how many of these meetings do we have? How many other professional associations do we participate in? Where are we giving presentations to really spread the word about, some of this important work, education and encouragement, and, some of the things we can do to help encourage, through commuter challenges and other things in that space. Micromobility, speaking specifically to spin e-scooters and e-bikes. So just kind of showing how many total miles were done, how many trips were made by scooter and by bike respectively, and what the average trip distance is. And then just kind of capturing some of the conversations we've heard from some residents, that are supportive of this work. So again, I know that was a very quick kind of flyby on what the Centennial Snapshot is, but hopefully it gives you an appreciation for some of the things that were accomplished last year. And again, if you want a deeper dive at a future time, I'm happy to come back and maybe bring Suzanne, who was the primary author on this, give her an opportunity to talk more about it.
All right, thanks, Herman.
All right.
Let's move on to liaison reports. Any commissioners who serve as a liaison to another body or organization, if you have a quick report you'd like to provide, now's the time. All right. Seeing none, commission member communications. This time, all commissioners are invited to provide any reports or updates if they'd like. Erica.
Yeah, just wanted to share that at council's meeting on Monday, we did pass a resolution that was supportive of AAATA's call for sort of a transit analysis for the US 23 corridor. So that passed unanimously, and supporting the ride's efforts to add that to the environmental analysis that's happening on US 23.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right. For future agenda items, as always, please send a note or somehow message myself or Raymond or Megan. We always like to get ideas for future agenda topics. Some may have come out from today's meeting, actually. All right. So with that, the next meeting, let's see. Some previously requested agenda items that we might expect in the near future include the fiscal year 25 budget, a Get Downtown program update, crash response protocol discussion, 23-24 season in review for winter maintenance, and yeah, any other new topics that come in. All right, next meeting will be held on Wednesday, April 17th at 7 p.m. This will also be a virtual meeting like this one. And if there are no objections, we will adjourn this March 20th, 2024 meeting. Seeing no objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.